it's one of the nice things about it being a young industry. It is a disruptive industry in the sense that, traditional radio has had to change dramatically because podcasts are out there.
This is Tom Fox. Have you ever thought about starting a podcast? Well, 2022 is the year for you. If you're interested in finding out more about starting a podcast, please give me a shout at tfox Law. I can talk to you about the advantages of being in the Compliance Podcast Network, as well as the production values created by my production partner, One Stone Creative. It's a very affordable experience. It's a way for you to get your name out, build your brand, and most importantly, join one of the most dynamic, disruptive communications strategies there are. So what's holding you back? Give me a shout and let's talk about you creating the podcast you've always wanted. Today, I'm joined by Gordon Firemark, entertainment lawyer who became one of the first podcast lawyers. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, back again with Gordon Firemark. Gordon is one of the country's first and probably top lawyers representing podcasters in the podcast world. So I like to catch up with Gordon every once in a while, find out what he's up to and what he's seeing in the market. So, Gordon, first of all, welcome back to the pod.
Thanks, Tom. Great to be here. I had a good time last time, and I'm looking forward to today. So thanks.
So let's start off with the legal side because it gets to wed two of my favorite passions, law and podcasting. But I wanted to use that as a way to introduce the question to you is, what, if anything, is new in the legal world for podcasters?
In the legal world, I think it's actually pretty stable. I guess that's good news. Nobody has been disrupting things on the legal end all that much. There's, the usual issues around plagiarism. People, there've been a glut of podcasts that have been sort of true crime shows or whatever, and basically they're reading from newspaper articles and accounts, and then the journalists call them out on it, and they have to apologize and those kinds of things. Journalistic integrity, I think, is a hot topic in the space. And I think part of that is that many podcasters don't think of themselves as journalists, even when what they're doing is very similar to traditional broadcast journalism in a lot of ways. Copyright infringement, with music licensing and those kinds of things is an ongoing issue. And the usual stepping on toes, someone picks a title for their show without checking and finding out that there's at least one other out there in the marketplace. And then somebody wants to make them stop and change their titles and things like that. And, that's the name of my game mostly.
I may have to talk to you about some legal work at some point. Are there, you've detailed some of the legal risks that are kind of ongoing. Are those the key legal risks podcasters need to think about, or are there some others that come to mind from you?
Tom, the risks for when podcasting are the same risks that really any media maker, media distributor has to contend with. And the unique ones are, like we were talking about, the plagiarism and copyright infringement things. Copyright infringement sometimes sneaks up on people because they may not realize that what they're using is copyrighted material. You don't have to be copying a song or, incorporating a song into your show if you're quoting lyrics or if you're, reciting a poem, those kinds of things. That can be a kind of copyright infringement as well. And the takedown issues, where a guest comes on and agrees to do a recording and then later says, I don't want it. I want you to take it down. It's hurting my business, my career, my job opportunities, or just my reputation or something. I always advocate using a release when guests come on a show to get them to sign off on the consent to record and distribute, those kinds of things. And then there are the usual topics that address sort of more business-oriented stuff. Who owns the show? If you've got partners, if you've got a team, you want to make sure that everybody is on the same page contractually to make sure that the intended owner of the show is in fact the owner. Legally, copyright law, provides for joint authorship. When people get together with the intent to make a single unified thing, they own it jointly unless there's something to the contrary, evidence to the contrary. So we're looking for those kinds of documentation. entity formations and structures. We've got liability issues around privacy and defamation and infringements and those kinds of things. And I'm always advising podcasters about, if the podcast is a standalone business, use an entity to separate it from your other stuff. And if it's not a standalone business, but it's a component of your marketing strategy for, as we both do for our law firms and things like that, maybe we want to think about how we're going to manage that risk. And it may be an entity, it may be insurance, it may be self-insurance, there's all kinds of, but it's something we need to be thinking about. If you use a team to create your show, you've got the usual suspects in the labor and employment arena. Are you properly classifying people? Could you get dinged for calling people independent contractors when they look to the tax authorities like an employee? Here in California, we have a law, AB 5 is what it's called, and it's thrown everything into turmoil about this question of how do we classify people, and is there such a thing as an independent contractor anymore in most industries has become the big question. And then, of course, protecting our own property, intellectual property, and things like that is an ongoing process.
Let me turn now to the podcast market, because I think that is something we've seen some pretty big and dramatic changes over the past year. And really, from where you sit in the media capital of the world, where do you see the podcast, or how have you seen the podcast market develop over the past 12 months or so?
I'd say it's very definitely in a growth phase. I'd say since the beginning of pandemic, so the last 18 months or so, a lot of people have entered the space creating podcasts. The barriers to entry are fairly small and low, and so it's been very easy for people to come into the space. And the ones who continue and last past 7, 10, 15 episodes are able to attract an audience and see some success, and more importantly, have an impact on the people they do touch. So that's encouraging. We've crossed over the 2 million podcasts in the world mark. Sometime earlier this year, we saw that number. Now, that includes all the ones that have faded out after a few episodes, but it's still an awful lot of podcasts out there, and fulfilling all various kinds of niches and things like that. So that's really cool. The advertising end of things seems to be on the growth, on an upswing. We're seeing the advertising rates are ticking up a little bit. It's usually a CPM, cost per mil, per 1,000 downloads kind of a basis. And from what I'm seeing, the average dollar amount per mil is gone up a few cents over the last few years, and it'll continue to increase. It's around, I think, averaging around $23.50 or so per 1,000 downloads per spot. And so that's encouraging. If you've got the listener base to support it, you can actually make some real money from podcasting. And more brands are entering the podcasting advertising space. So where it used to just be, Audible and Casper Mattress and a few others, we're starting to see a lot more companies getting in and investing their resources in podcasts, because they know people are listening, and it's a different kind of attention that people pay to podcasts than they do to even just the radio listening when they're driving around in the car or those kinds of things. So very encouraging. I think this is a business, an industry that's about to really take off. In fact, I saw a piece yesterday talking about YouTube is getting into the podcasting space. They're starting to develop tools that are more oriented at the primarily audio market. And, YouTube is a multi-billion-dollar enterprise already, and they wouldn't be throwing resources into something that they don't see a future for. So Spotify's been investing lots of money in podcasts. I'm bullish.
Things that I've been alerted to over the past couple of weeks is that some podcasters and prominent people in the podcast space have moved to a cryptocurrency, taking payment in some form of crypto, whether it be Bitcoin or some other form. And so I've looked at that, and obviously that puts you in a different sort of realm with crypto, both in terms of payment. What concerns me is when they talk about, well, this could turn into an investment for you and appreciate. Well, unfortunately, in my other life, I follow the Securities and Exchange Commission, and I know what happens when you say, here, buy my stuff, it's a great investment, it puts you in a whole different category of regulations. I wonder, are you starting to see any of that in your practice?
I've had a few people offer to pay me in cryptocurrency, and I haven't yet pulled the trigger on that. I think I might. It seems like it might be kind of a fun way to dabble, at least at the beginning. I hadn't thought about the fact that, if you trade services or goods in exchange for crypto with the idea that it's an appreciating investment asset, is that a securities transaction? Are you relying on? I wonder if it passes the Howey test. Actually, does it? Are you relying on the efforts of others for income, or is it really just it's not an organic growth? But you know what I'm saying. So that's a good question.
So I think if you say that an investment appreciate, that puts you in Howey.
Certainly, if that's the reason you're accepting the form of payment. I mean, I guess if I was paid in stock certificates, it would be the same thing, wouldn't it?
Where I've seen it used is sort of prepaying for services. You pay in the crypto, and then or you pay some dollars and you get a crypto coin back. And at that point, the company says, "Well, your crypto will appreciate," and that just strikes me as something different.
Yeah, that's interesting. Certainly, there's crypto trading. I think it is a challenging moment. I'm not all that well tuned into the crypto world. I probably ought to be. What I am seeing is cryptocurrency and crypto tokens being used in the NFT space, the non-fungible tokens. And that's also an appreciating asset kind of a thing where, you create this, I call it an artwork for lack of a better term. And it's funny, I was thinking just on a lark, maybe I would re-release episode 1 of my podcast from 12 years ago as an NFT and just see what happens, see if anybody's interested. I suspect I'd be the only investor.
We're going to have a quick message from our sponsor, and then we'll be right back with more from the FCPA Compliance Report. Well, you say that, but actually someone contacted me yesterday and said, why don't you consider creating NFTs for your entire back catalog? Because my back catalog is 3,000 now. I had only thought of NFTs in terms of something like cover art or static piece of artwork, whether it be a painting, a picture. But obviously the National Basketball Association has created NFTs around highlights, and there are other forms of NFTs. But perhaps you could do the same format with your actual audio recording.
Yeah, absolutely. The big issue that we're watching, covered this on my podcast this last week, in the NFT space is questions about, when it's the National Basketball Association or a major film studio or something like that. There's a current dispute going on between Quentin Tarantino and Miramax Films over Tarantino's intention to create some NFTs from the original script pages from Pulp Fiction. And he's planning to create an NFT that would consist of a scene from the movie and his own little commentary and, maybe something, some artwork or drawings or something. And Miramax says, hey, you made that stuff as a work for hire for us. It's ours. It's not yours. You don't get to do that. But, contracts, however, 20 years ago or more, didn't really address these kinds of, we always had the, now all media now known and hereafter devised. But it's something we're watching, and we'll see how that dispute plays out, and there will be more like it.
Have you seen the NFTs in the podcast world in a way other than, as we've talked about, with actually creating an NFT for an individual podcast?
I haven't yet. It just hasn't crossed my desk, and I watch the news and social and channels and things like that, and I'm just not hearing much about it. There are plenty of podcasts starting up to talk about the NFT industry, but I'm not seeing a lot of discussion about podcasts as NFT or using NFT as a podcast monetization tool, although I think there's a lot of opportunity there. So give it the next year.
One of the things that I greatly enjoy about the podcast space, as opposed to perhaps the legal space, is how dynamic it is. And just in, discussing this with you in this podcast, I can see how quickly we've moved in a variety of different areas that seem to be incredibly dynamic, incredibly exciting, and frankly, a lot of fun.
It's one of the nice things about it being a young industry. It is a disruptive industry in the sense that, traditional radio has had to change dramatically because podcasts are out there, and they occupy a different sort of listening space nowadays. And then you've got entities like Spotify that are sort of bridging the gap between music and podcasts. And there's still a lot of room for more disruption, more development, and it's an exciting time. And the people are the greatest asset of the podcasting community. We've got a greater diversity of voices and points of view, and it's a cooperative feeling group. I have yet to encounter podcasters that are sort of feeling like it's competitive. Nobody's competing against each other. They're all, playing it's like golf, you're looking to beat your own best score. So, I think that's one of the nice things and fun things about it is there's room for everybody. And if you've got something to say, if you've got a message to get out, you want to have an impact, podcasting is a great tool.
Let's turn to Firemark Law, because one of the things that you provide a variety of services, obviously for hire legal services on an hourly basis, but you also put together packages for podcasters, packages of legal forms that they can purchase, and you do really other types of, I'm not sure I'd call it consulting, but other types of events through your legal platform and your podcast world. And I was wondering if you maybe could walk us through each one of those, really starting with the package service offerings Firemark Law has.
Well, yeah, if you don't mind, I'll even start at the bottom of my sort of, I call it an ascension pyramid of my offerings and things, and that's the free stuff that I do. I try to give away a lot of information. I'm a born teacher. I'm here to help. I want to help creative people, podcasters, digital media creators. I've been doing entertainment law for my whole career of 30 years. So filmmakers and theater makers and all those kinds of folks, that's who I'm here to serve. And one of the ways I try to serve is by sharing information, education. And so I'm doing a lot. I go live on Facebook quite a lot, and I'm going to up my game on LinkedIn in the next few months. So if you follow me on social, you'll see more and more of me, and I try to provide useful tips and information that folks can use to stay out of trouble and improve their prospects and a lot in life, their abundance and those kinds of things. Then next after the free, I do offer some forms and templates for podcasters and digital entrepreneurs and online course creators and coaches. If you need a legal document, the basic kind, we can help there at easylegaltemplates.com and podcast law forms as well. Then sort of moving up the ladder, I have some online courses, one for digital entrepreneurs called Easy Legal for Digital Entrepreneurs, and the other is Easy Legal for Podcasters. It's a specific course for podcasters where I sort of address all of those things in the framework that I mentioned earlier, the entity structure, the intellectual property structure, the team, and as well as the monetization and how we're going to turn it into money, I guess you could say. And we cover all the sort of legal basics of that to teach the how-to for the do-it-yourselfers. Because there's plenty of folks out there who need this, want to do it, but aren't in a position or just choose not to hire done-for-you services with lawyers. And that's the top of the pyramid right there, is the done-for-you approach. Call me up and I'll do it for you, and I'll charge you a fee.
So the really the dynamicism of you forgot to add, you also publish. You have ebooks available that help us walk through each of those. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, the main ebook is the Digital Entrepreneur. I'm sorry, not the Digital Entrepreneurs. The Podcast, Blog, and New Media Producers Legal Survival Guide is the ebook. It's been out for a while. It's sort of due for an update, and the law hasn't changed dramatically, but it just needs a refresh. But it's available at podcastlawbook.com, and it's a quick, easy. I guess you could call it a sort of desk reference cheat sheet for folks who are getting into the media production space and so you can know the rules about defamation and privacy and contracts and copyrights and those kinds of things. So that's the podcast law book.
One of the things, in fact, the way I met you was through a podcast conference back in 2015, podcast movement, but you speak at other podcast conferences, Podfest Global and other Podfest events. I was wondering if you have any speaking engagements. Hopefully we'll be back live in 2022, maybe coming up in the spring of 2022 you could tell us about.
Well, coming up in March is the podcast movement Evolutions here in Los Angeles, and I have submitted to speak. I don't know whether they will select my proposed panels, but I'm looking forward to that. And then in the later part of the spring and into the summer, Podfest Expo, which usually happens in Orlando, and then the bigger podcast movement conference is in, I think, July in
Dallas,
Texas. Okay, so I knew it was somewhere in Texas. I wasn't sure, and they haven't announced who the speakers are yet. But I'm hoping. I'm looking forward to it. I love to get up on that stage and share knowledge and answer questions. And even if I'm not selected, I'll probably be there doing some impromptu Q&A for here and there anyway. But trying to come up with some interesting new variations on the topics to keep it interesting and fresh.
Well, frankly, I've learned so much in this podcast. I think there's several different things that you could talk about. So I will be at those events as well. So hopefully I will be able to catch up with you.
I hope so too. That's right.
Well, Gordon, unfortunately, we're near the end of our time for this episode. But once again, I wanted to thank you for taking the time to come on the pod. And I look forward to continuing this conversation.
Thank you so much, Tom. Appreciate it. It's been nice to be with you.
This is Tom Fox again. I would urge you to check out Karen Woody's new podcast on the Compliance Podcast Network, where with students from her insider trading class, she explores the history of insider trading. It's a unique format for a podcast with Karen interviewing her students, but her students are great, very knowledgeable, and I know you will enjoy it. Once again, it's Classroom Insider, and it appears on the Compliance Podcast Network. Thanks again for listening to this episode, and I hope you will join us again next week for another episode of the FCPA Compliance Report, which is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.